From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Jason Steinhauer, and I'm a program specialist at the John W. Kluge Center at the Library of Congress. Before we begin today's program, please take a moment to check your cell phones and other electronic devices, and please set them to silent. Thank you. I'll also make you aware that this afternoon's program is being filmed for placement on the Kluge Center website, as well as our YouTube and iTunes U channels. I encourage you to visit our website, loc.gov/Kluge, K-L-U-G-E, to view other lectures delivered by current and past Kluge scholars, including several on military history, veterans history, and lectures by past Larson Fellows researching topics at the intersection of health and spirituality. Today's lecture is presented by the John W. Kluge Center at the Library of Congress in cooperation with the library's Veterans History Project and Prints and Photographs Division. The Veterans History Project is the nation's largest oral history project, a collection of more than 90,000 stories of America's war veterans from World War I through the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, collected by volunteers nationwide and preserved in the Library of Congress collections. A congressionally mandated project, the program was created by a unanimous act of Congress in the year 2000, and this year celebrates its 15th anniversary. We're delighted to have staff from the Veterans History Project here with us today. The library's Prints and Photographs Division are the custodians of the library's more than 15 million photographs, fine and popular prints and drawings, posters, architectural and engineering drawings. The division has more than 76,000 pictures relating to World War I alone, including photographic prints and negatives, cartoons, ephemera, posters, and drawings. Selected items from the Prints and Photographs collection, as well as from the Veterans History Project collection, are on display in the back of the room, and we invite you to view the materials on display, which have been pulled especially for this event. We at the Kluge Center are delighted to welcome you and to host this event. The Kluge Center is a vibrant scholar center on Capitol Hill that brings together scholars and researchers from around the world to distill wisdom from the library's rich resources, to stimulate and energize one another, and to interact with policymakers and the public. The center offers opportunities for senior scholars, postdoctoral fellows, and PhD candidates to conduct research in the Library of Congress collections. We also offer lectures, conferences, symposia, book talks, panels, conversations. We offer a lot of programs. And I invite you to sign up for our RSS list in the back of the room to learn about future events. We also administer the Kluge Prize, which recognizes a lifetime achievement in the study of humanity. And we will award the Kluge Prize in 2015. For more information about the center, I encourage you to visit our website, as well as to see what future opportunities there may be for you to conduct your own research here at the Library of Congress. Our lecture today is titled Art from War, Documenting Devastation, Realizing Restoration. Our speaker is Tara Tappert, now concluding her tenure as David B. Larson Fellow in Health and Spirituality here at the Kluge Center. Tara's work examines arts and crafts making as a powerful resource for military service members wounded during war. Her work is especially resonant today as more than 2.5 million veterans of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan return to the United States, some with wounds that are visible and some that the naked eye cannot see. A staggering 1/3 of these veterans state that their mental and emotional health is worse today than it was when they deployed, according to a recent Washington Post report. So America has a long challenge ahead of us to reintegrate and rehabilitate these men and women. In this milieu, the power of the arts as an agent in the healing process has once again come to the forefront in communities and hospitals. Healing arts opportunities are a means to rehabilitate the entirety of the person, not solely the injury. And as Tara will illuminate for us, there is an important and little-known history of how the U.S. military has embraced arts and crafts making in the 20th century for rehabilitation, training, and well-being from World War I through today. Tara's research is very much in keeping with the spirit of the fellowship that she holds, the David B. Larson Fellowship in Health and Spirituality. The fellowship is made possible by a generous endowment from the International Center for the Integration of Health and Spirituality and named in honor of the center's late founder, David B. Larson, an epidemiologist and psychiatrist who focused on the understudied factors that help in prevention, coping, and recovering from illness. The fellowship is designed to continue Dr. Larson's legacy of promoting meaningful, scholarly study of these two increasingly interconnected and interrelated fields, spirituality and health. We are currently accepting applications for future Larson Fellows, and I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about the eligibility and for the application procedures. And we are delighted to have Susan Larson as a guest with us this afternoon and wish to acknowledge her support of this fellowship. Finally, and most importantly, to introduce Tara. Tara is an independent scholar, researcher, writer, curator, archivist, practitioner. Her list of nouns is long. From her time working to establish a community arts center within a small Michigan hospital to Wounded Warrior Artist in Residence programs she's been so intimately involved with at Walter Reed, Tara has exhibited a compassion for victims of trauma and a deep respect for the healing power of the arts. Since 2010, Tara has been researching and writing about the arts and the military and the artistic expressions of war trauma, tracing and uncovering a history that is not largely known. Inspired by the varied artwork of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, Tara founded the Arts and the Military, a grassroots organization that produced Arts, Military Plus Healing Initiative, a 6-day event with workshops and programs held at several major institutions in the Washington, D.C. area. She served as exhibitions curator for the Combat Paper Project, arts editor for the 3rd issue of the Journal of Military Experiences, an adjunct professor teaching a class titled The Arts and the Military at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Tara has also curated 3 arts and military exhibitions. She holds a PhD in American Studies from the George Washington University. She is a scholar of great energy, of great warmth, and great conviction, and we have been delighted to have her with us for the past year. So please join me in welcoming Tara Tappert.
I do this as a delivered lecture, so I'm just going to go. This lecture is a culmination of my research year at the Library of Congress, digging into World War I related collections that highlights the responses of artists and veterans impacted by the traumas of the First World War, and by the ways in which plastic surgery, mask making, and occupational therapy were used to help the war wounded worldwide. While it is timely to focus on World War I, we're currently in the centenary years of the Great War. This research project is a part of a larger community-based initiative of using the arts to address trauma, particularly war trauma. Multiple current-day veteran arts initiatives give life to this historical record. Over the past 5 years, there have been numerous war-inspired art exhibitions, countless writing and art-making workshops, theater, dance, and music performances, documentary films, and art festivals and symposiums, all dedicated to veterans and their effects by war. The veteran artist communities with which I have had the privilege and honor to work and know have been an inspiration for this research. as have the dedicated health practitioners who work today with today's war wounded. At the Library of Congress, my research has been enriched by collections in the Veterans History Project, Prints and Photographs Division, and the General Collections. A 2014 National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institute at the University of Cincinnati, World War I and the Arts, Sound, Vision, and Psyche, has also informed this project. I have deeply appreciated the congeniality of the scholar community in the Kluge Center here at the library, and am sincerely grateful to the center's dedicated personnel that help make our work possible. Thank you, Jane, Mary Lou, Travis, Jason, my summer intern, Peter Flint, and Kluge Fellow David McLaughlin, who's helping with this presentation today. I also thank Patrick Sargent, Pam Stewart, Mike Fay, Shanti Norris, Ann O'Donnell, Peggy Ann Brown, and Mark Levitch for their encouragement, support, and contributions to this research. This research project began with the artwork of contemporary veterans. In 2010, I was introduced to artists working with Combat Paper Project, a veterans arts initiative that offers papermaking workshops for veterans and, for a time, also interested civilians. Military uniforms are shredded, pulped, and made into paper, and workshop participants use the paper to create artwork. The transformative nature of the papermaking process provides communal opportunities for veterans to share stories of their military lives and to work at making sense of their war experiences. Founded in 2007, Combat Paper offered workshops throughout the country from 2008 to 2012. Since then, the phenomena of papermaking for veteran populations has absolutely exploded, and many different groups are now offering papermaking in VA hospitals, military hospitals such as Walter Reed and Fort Belvoir, and art centers, museums, libraries, and universities across the country. Jesse Albrecht participated in his first Combat Paper Project workshop in Iowa in 2010. An Iraq War veteran and university-trained ceramist and sculptor, he had served in Iraq in 2003 and 2004 as an Army medic with the Iowa National Guard. His unit was stationed in Mosul, where they lived in tents under the entryway to Saddam Hussein's palace. The chaos, brutality, and ambiguity of the war were unnerving for Albrecht, and 6 years later, when he took part in the Iowa Combat Paper Project workshop, he was still actively dealing with memories of his time in combat. Albrecht uses his art training to both address the traumas of his own war experiences and to explore the culture of war and the military. His year in Mosul and the horrific devastation of Saddam's cruel and imperialistic dictatorship got under Jesse's skin, and art making became one of the ways he displaced the charge of his military experience. Many of Albrecht's Combat Paper Project pieces are kitschy images of Saddam Hussein, portraits of himself and the despot, and ironic messages to the tyrant. The ceramic pots included here incorporate other war memories. They depict images of archaeological antiquities found in the ancient biblical city of Nineveh, just across the Tigris River from Mosul. Albrecht's determination to create an art practice that investigates the traumas of war is in part a result of the war stories he heard from relatives while growing up. 3 generations of his family served in 4 different wars: World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and Iraq. His great-uncle, Everett DeMoss, was gassed while serving during the First World War, and afterwards was nearly always drunk. Such stories motivate Albrecht and inform the messages conveyed in his artwork about war. The war that traumatized Jesse's great-uncle and caused him to turn to drink to blunt his memories of the horrors and devastation was the world's first truly modern war. The United States joined the fray on April 7, 1917, and the use of tanks, aircraft, heavy artillery, and poison gas, coupled with intense trench warfare, took its physical and psychological toll on those who served. 16 million lives were lost, and a further 21 million were injured. During and after the war, veterans and civilians alike turned to the arts, visual, literary, music, theater, film, and dance, to document the devastation. Diaries in the collections of the library's Veterans History Project and the Smithsonian Archives of American Art give voice and life to the experiences of those who served in the war. Horace Pippin, a highly regarded African-American artist after the war, was a colonel with the 15th New York Infantry, the legendary 369th Colored Infantry Regiment of the U.S. Army Guard Division, soldiers that called themselves the Harlem Rattlers. Caught by a sniper's bullet just weeks before the armistice, as a disabled veteran of color, Pippin not only survived the traumas of his war experiences, but also the traumas of racism. A Texas farm boy of German descent, Hilly John Franz, was a first-class private during the First World War. While serving in France, he found a nearly unused German ledger book, and in spite of his lack of formal education, he decided to record his experiences. Franz's diary captures the chaos of the infantryman's life during wartime. At 6'4.5" tall, Elliot Hughes Lee, a Princeton graduate, exceeded the maximum height for officers' candidate school by half an inch. He was advised to join the U.S. Army Ambulance Corps with units departing for France and attached to the French Army. With the rank of first lieutenant, Lee worked at the front during the Second Battle of the Marne in July 1918 and was later awarded 3 Croix de Guerre by the French government. Nicknamed Big Boy during his time in the service, Quirin Grossell grew up in a German-American family in Wisconsin. A corporal in the 5th Wisconsin Regiment, Grossell survived a brutal bayonet attack. His diary records his dramatic combat experiences as well as his recovery in various hospitals in France and the United States. To the accompaniment of Ravel's Piano Concerto for the Left Hand, I will read short excerpts from these diaries. The music by Ravel was commissioned by the Austrian-born concert pianist Paul Wittgenstein, who lost his right arm during World War I. Following the war, he commissioned new piano concerti for the left hand only from composers throughout Europe. The music and diary entries are further complemented by a set of photographs taken at the war front and paintings, drawings, and sketches by artists, both veterans and civilians, who recorded artistically the devastations of the war. I've been captivated by the artwork of Claggett Wilson, a set designer and interior decorator who served in the Marines during the First World War. Wilson created breathtaking images with evocative titles, and some of his work is peppered throughout this section of the presentation. Wilson, like Jesse Albrecht's great-uncle DeMoss, was gassed during the war. From Horace Pippin's diary, I remember the day very well that we left the good old USA, although she were in trouble with Germany, and to do our duty to her, we had to go and travel there. And we did on the 17th of November, 1917. It was the 15th New York Inf, and it were 14 days when we seen the French harbor. We were all glad to get off that ship and put foot on land again. We were Camp 1, December to February, and in that time we laid the railroad from the ocean so that the U.S. could get her cargo off in good time. We laid about 500 miles of rail in that time, and we went to bed in the dark and got out in the dark. Although our next move were to the trenches, we did not care. It were a place we all wanted to see, so the time came for us to pack up and go to a little town called Melfort that were torn up bad. The French did it to the Germans to get the Germans out in 1915, and in that time they gained 5 color and no more. From Hilly John France's diary, October 3, 1918. We had a real air battle as we heard that 3 American planes had slipped in on Metz and were booming the stronghold of the German supply lines when the Germ or Hun planes came in on them, and the dogfight was on. 2 Germans or Hun planes were downed, and the American planes took off for home. And as they were passing over German lines, a squadron of Hun planes nearly caught them, and here a real air battle took place. The sky was full of smoke from machine gun fire. One of the American planes was hit and caught on fire and was turning over and over within about 1,000 feet of the ground. A man jumped out, and he was caught on fire. He was saved on our side of the line. He was picked up, badly burned, and died the next day. He had some important information and pictures of German rail line moving supplies. The other 2 planes were saved back across our lines. From Elliot Hugh Lee's diary, to acquaint myself with our duties, I went as extra man on an ambulance to each post at which loads were picked up, spending the night in dugouts. It was a bitter cold winter, and there were usually small stoves in the dugout, but wood was scarce and always wet. We were stationed in half-underground dugouts in a village undamaged by shell fire, from which cars went daily to the various posts. Stretcher bearers brought the wounded and sick to doctors at the posts, and we took them to a central sorting station where selection was made as to which hospital they would go, and ours or other ambulances would take them there. From the first pickup to the triage was usually no more than 2 miles on roads often shelled. From Quirin M. Grassel's diary, staggering drunkenly, my head hanging down and my arms hanging helplessly at my sides, I fell to the ground, trying to cross the parapet in front of our trench. Even before I could cry out for help, the lookouts in our trench had alerted the others who had laid down a covering fire. 2 of our boys crawled partially out of the trench, grabbed me by the blouse, and pulled me into the trench. The first aid men were also the stretcher bearers and had used all of their first aid bandages trying to cover my wound. I was placed on a stretcher covered with a blanket, and started on my way to the battalion first aid station. From the woods to the church was only a short distance. I was carried through a shell hole in the wall into the basement of the church. When it came my turn, the doctor asked, "Where is your wound?" I replied, "In the neck, and I can't use my arms." I was helped to a sitting position and held there while the bandages were removed. Someone gave a low whistle. I was given a shot of anti-tetanus in the belly, and a cross was painted on my forehead with iodine. Just before I was carried out to a waiting ambulance, the doctor said to me, "We have done all that we can for you here and are sending you back to a field hospital for surgery." American Field Hospital number 12 was a tent hospital, but the x-ray equipment did not work. So out into another ambulance I went with orders to the driver to get me to the nearest hospital. It was a French hospital, number 37, staffed by French doctors, nurses, and orderlies. All of the patients were French soldiers until I arrived. The doctor who had operated on me came over to see how I was doing. With the little French I knew, and with the little English he knew, he made me understand that I would get well. As the madness of war came to an end, renewal and restoration became the new agenda. Carry On was a peacetime message that provided hope and resolution for the war wounded. 4 different plans of action that were put into motion after the war made it possible for the war wounded to move on in life. Through plastic surgery, mask making, occupational and physical therapy, and vocational training, creative and artistic expression intersected with medicine and economics. One of the first lines of defense was caring for the many men whose faces were mutilated by gunshot blasts and shrapnel. Initially trained as a surgeon and later as an artist, Henry Tonks was in his 50s when the war broke out. A temporary commission as a lieutenant in the Royal Army Medical Corps brought him into contact with pioneering plastic surgeon Harold Gillies, who asked him to make drawings of patients before and after surgery. Tonks accepted and wrote a colleague, "It is a chamber of horrors, but I am quite content to draw them as it is excellent practice." Gillies became interested in plastic surgery of the face after joining the Royal Army Medical Corps in 1915. After the Battle of the Somme in 1916, he treated 2,000 cases of jaw and facial mutilation. Gillies moved to Queen's Hospital, Sidcup, in 1917, and there he performed more than 11,000 plastic surgeries of the face on over 5,000 men, mostly soldiers with facial injuries from gunshot wounds. Aesthetics mattered to Gillies. He did the best he could to make his patients look as similar as possible as to how they appeared before their injury. The surgery performed on Lieutenant William Spreckley, who had lost his entire nose to a grenade blast, was so successful, Dr. Gillies noted its significance in the development of nasal reconstruction. Francis Derwent Wood, a British sculptor, also joined the Royal Army Medical Corps in 1915. His proposal to make sculpted masks for severely disfigured servicemen was accepted, and the Masks for Facial Disfigurement Department opened in the 3rd London General Hospital, Wandsworth, in 1916. Known as the Tin Noses Shop, Wood was clear that his work began after the work of the surgeon was complete. His contribution was that of an artist. He noted that I endeavor by means of the skill I happen to possess as a sculptor to make a man's face as near as possible to what it looked like before he was wounded. Working from pre-war photographs, Wood meticulously created the features of the wounded, designing a copper mask 1/32 of an inch in thickness. The purpose of the mask was to lessen psychological pain and social isolation. Wood noted that the patient acquires his old self-respect, self-assurance, self-reliance. Influenced by the work of Francis Derwent Wood, American sculptor Anna Coleman Ladd opened the Red Cross administered studio for portrait masks in Paris in late 1917. For the next year and a half, she directed the making of about 100 cosmetic copper masks that were worn by men badly disfigured during the war. In a report from the studio written in 1919, the author noted that people adjusted to seeing men with arms and legs missing. They never got used to an abnormal face. One of the patients was a man who had been wounded 2.5 years before in 1916 and had never been home since then, as he did not want his mother to see how badly he looked. The masks made it possible for the men to go on with their lives. While the work of Gillies, Wood, and Ladd restored a modicum of self-respect regarding appearance, there was still a great deal of work to do to help the crippled and disabled veteran. As the Red Cross poster demonstrates, the number of war wounded continued to grow after the war. Two significant entities played important roles in the care and restoration of the war wounded: the military and government, and the Red Cross. The work included occupational therapy, physical therapy, and vocational training. The plucky woman who took up the pioneering work of a reconstruction aid embraced an arts and crafts movement belief in holistic well-being, was in tune with the late 19th and early 20th century advancements in mental and physical health, and supported social reform. Reconstruction aids were divided into two types of workers: occupational therapists who provided therapeutic, economic, and diversion activities for patients, and physical therapists who used specially designed exercises and equipment to help patients reduce pain and improve or restore physical mobility. Both types of reconstruction aids were employed at the war front. The first reconstruction aids to provide service in France during the war went to Base Hospital number 117, where they worked with physically sound men suffering from war neurosis, helping them return to duty as quickly as possible. The success of this first group of workers resulted in a call for 1,000 of these aids as soon as you can get them ready. Lena Hitchcock was one of the reconstruction aides to respond to the call, working at Base Hospital number 9, where she provided occupational therapy instruction. She's included in these slides. An example of the type of work plied by convalescing soldiers in a warfront hospital occupation therapy workshop is this beautiful cross-stitch tea set depicting French, British, and American soldiers. Given to actress and singer Marion Abbott, who traveled to France during the war to entertain the wounded, the gift came from the soldiers in grateful appreciation for her service. Occupational therapy work was originally divided into two curative levels. The first, bedside occupations, such as knitting and basket weaving, primarily regarded as a diversion activity. The second, a more purposeful form of training intended to prepare a soldier for employment after his discharge from the hospital. In 1917, the Red Cross opened the headquarters of the Institute for Crippled and Disabled Men in New York City. During the war years, the Red Cross dealt on a massive scale with the needs of the disabled. Considered the first specialized trade school in the country to work with adults with disabilities, the purpose of the Institute was to rehabilitate disabled men and to provide them with training to become economically self-sufficient. The mission extended worldwide. Under the leadership of Douglas Crawford McMurtry, a highly regarded designer, historian, and bibliographer, whose interest in the disabled began when he compiled a list of all materials regarding handicapped children in the Society for Crippled Children. During the years he served the Red Cross Institute, he conducted disability studies, held public forums, published numerous documents about worldwide vocational training initiatives, created bibliographies of vocational training programs and of war cripples, and designed posters with messages regarding rehabilitation and resilience. And there's apparently a huge body of work by McMurtry here in the Library of Congress. He was like the classic bibliographer. Under the auspices of the Red Cross Institute for Crippled and Disabled Men, 18 posters were designed and sent out to exhibit in public institutions across the country, with messages in alignment with the government's post-war position regarding the care of crippled and disabled veterans. Physical wellness is equated with economic stability. The types of vocational training programs available to the war wounded are showcased in the exhibition posters. They even represent training programs for war veterans throughout the world. These posters showcase efforts in France and India. In the Prints and Photographs collection is a photo album of the vocational training workshop at the Port Velez Re-Educational School in Belgium. A detailed report of the activities of the school by the Red Cross Institute for Crippled and Disabled Men bring these photographs to light. Built by the Belgian Ministry of War in 1915, the work of the school was divided into 3 departments: the medical service, the academic department, and the Department of Technical Training. Over 40 trades were taught in the shops of the Department of Technical Training. Some of the art-focused workshops were wood carving, clock making, engraving and lithography, and bookbinding. Like the Re-Educational School in Port Velez, nearly all of the war-impacted countries offered their own vocational training and occupational therapy programs. Distinguished 19th century Field Marshal Lord Frederick Sleigh Roberts had long campaigned for more to be done for ex-service members, especially those who had been disabled. When he died in France in November 1914 while visiting troops fighting in the war, a decision was made to name workshops for which he had served as a trustee as a memorial to him. The workshops employed disabled veterans as well as the dependents and daughters of servicemen. By 1920, there were 11 workshops throughout the country, and some with specialties. Metal toys, including lead soldiers, were made in Birmingham. The Bradford workshop focused on printing and woolly toys. Colchester made household items and porcelain toy bricks, while Liverpool and Belfast made small furniture and toys. By 1921, government subsidies were cut and several of the workshop branches were forced to close. In addition to the Lord Roberts Memorial Workshop in Bradford, there was also embroidery work created by shell-shocked soldiers who attended classes at the Bradford Khaki Handicraft Club while convalescing at the Abram Peel Hospital, a military establishment for neurological disorders. Under the guidance of noted embroidery teacher Louisa Frances Pissell, hospitalized soldiers provided the khaki club a cross-stitch frontlet made at the khaki club in the autumn of 1918 for use at services in the Abram Peel Hospital Chapel. This remarkable altar cloth, hand embroidered by 133 wounded soldiers for St. Paul's Cathedral in London, was a project organized by the Royal School of Needlework. Produced by Commonwealth soldiers from the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa, convalescing in hospitals throughout Britain, the therapeutic lap craft not only resulted in beautiful embroidery, but also contributed to the restoration of fine motor skills and coordination invaluable to the men with limb injuries. The activity also offered a welcome distraction from the emotional anguish of their war experiences. The 10-foot wide altarpiece was with 5 panels was completed after the war by Royal School of Needlework experts who stitched the sections together. Upon its completion, the cloth was presented to St. Paul's Cathedral, where for decades it graced the front of the cathedral high altar. After the cathedral was bombed during the Second World War, the altar cloth was removed for safekeeping, stored away for over 70 years, and last August it was reinstalled in the cathedral as a commemoration of the war. Another one of the exciting finds of this project is the archival materials related to the war service of Canadian designer Nan Robertson Miller, who trained in New York at the Pratt Institute. Upon graduation in 1909, she returned to Canada to teach. In 1914, she was hired as the arts and crafts teacher at the Bramer School in Vancouver, British Columbia. And in 1917, the school was taken over to serve as a convalescent home for soldiers. Miller took a vocational training course in order to work with the returning soldiers at a Vancouver military hospital. She worked with the Department of Soldiers' Civil Reestablishment, the SCR, becoming director of the Vancouver Occupational Therapy Program. One of the existing examples of the artwork created with the convalescing servicemen is the articulated toy depicting a Dutch or Belgian peasant woman holding her child. Toy making was ubiquitous in occupational therapy programs throughout the world. And I also want to just say it's so unusual to actually find the objects itself like this, and I have Ann Stewart O'Donnell to thank for this. Occupational therapy and vocational training programs proliferated throughout the United States on military bases, at military hospitals, and at art organizations and artist studios. These 3 examples well demonstrate the wide reach of training available for wounded veterans interested in the arts. One of the first serious attempts to give disabled American veterans employment opportunities after the First World War was the occupational therapy program at Fort McHenry, U.S. Army Hospital No. 2 in Baltimore. The classes were offered to keep the wounded occupied and also provided potential means of livelihood. The spirit of the hospital's rehabilitation program was best depicted in an illustration of a recovering soldier on the anniversary cover of The Trouble Buster, Fort McHenry's own magazine, printed on its own presses by its patients. At the Pelham Bay Naval Camp in New York, Wounded soldiers who were members of the Associated Art Studios took art and cartooning lessons with Mort M. Berger, a well-known early 20th century newspaperman and cartoonist. Berger was living in New York City during and after the war. The wounded soldiers in Berger's class in 1920 were compensated by the government while they were training. In 1921, the Society of Illustrators opened the School for Disabled Soldiers. With support from the Veterans Bureau, the school ran for 3 years in government-provided facilities with government-supplied equipment. Between 75 and 100 students were trained at the school, and they proudly announced that 33% of their students were doing illustration work for some of the best magazines in the country. The school closed in 1924. One of the crafts considered as a particularly viable career option for disabled veterans was metalsmithing. In Chicago, Kalo Shop's founder, Clara Bark Wells, found some of the occupational therapy programs sweeping the country after the war to be inadequate for providing actual employment opportunities. She particularly objected to toy making. In 1918, Wells opened her studio workshop for a class in instruction to teach the wounded useful arts. Final products like the copper and silver box made by a wounded soldier in another occupational therapy class was more likely what she had envisioned. The experiences of William Waldo Dodge Jr. are also an example of what Clara Bark Wells had in mind for post-war employment. Dodge returned from the war in 1919 and spent the next 4 years in military hospitals and tuberculosis sanatoriums. His time as a convalescent played a role in the development of his career as a silversmith and later as an architect. Dodge began his journey into silversmithing while recuperating at the Gaylord Farm Sanatorium in Wallingford, Connecticut. There he learned the basics from Margaret Wheeler Robinson, who he married in 1921. Together, Dodge and his wife established a silversmithing workshop, Gaylord Silvercraft, which became a part of the vocational training and occupational therapy for the sanatorium patients. The Dodges developed many of the design products by the workshop, such as the money clip, cufflinks, pin, and 2 bracelets you see here. While Dodge moved on to a post-war career as an architect in North Carolina, Ralph Grimm's work as an artisan remained firmly identified with his occupational therapy training at Walter Reed General Hospital. Just 4 days before the armistice was signed, Grimm lost both of his legs during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Unable to return to his previous employment as a miner in Colorado, he took up silversmithing and jewelry making under the tutelage of hospital reconstruction aide Alberta Montgomery. In 1920, he opened a studio across the street from the hospital, went on to complete commissions for institutions such as the National Cathedral, exhibited his work in local arts and crafts shows, and met with dignitaries such as Mrs. Calvin Coolidge. The mark for Grimm's work is the insignia of his regiment, the 89th Division of the 355th Infantry. Sadly, Grimm's memory of his war experience never left him, and in February 1935, he used gas to take his life. I'm going to skip this slide. Well, Horace Pippin lost the use of his right arm to a sniper bullet during the war and confronted limitations of access to the kinds of rehabilitation programs that were typically available to white disabled veterans after the war. Despite the celebrated accomplishments of Pippen's 369th Regiment, they were the only American troop to serve consistently on the front line with the French for 6 months. Their heroism was blunted by racism, and their ambition of equality were summarily dismissed. After the war, Pippen chose to go his own way, using art to craft a new identity, noting that the war brought out all the art in me. These photos show his labor-intensive painting process, using his strong left hand to support his right hand and crippled arm. As the sole agent of his own rehabilitation, Pippen married, created a stable home life, did odd jobs, collected a pension, and took up painting. His body of artwork included recreations of American history, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, biblical and spiritual motifs, and between 1930 and 1945, some 30 paintings about war. Pippen kept a journal while he was in France, and his 1945 painting, The Barracks, suggests one of his journal notes. I didn't know if they had sun there or not. I had not seen the sun in more than a month. Another war-related painting, Mr. Prejudice, powerfully captured Pippen's feelings regarding discrimination and segregation. Created during the Second World War as a commentary about the repeated bigotry toward African American soldiers in service then, the painting divides whites from blacks and depicts a grim-faced white man hammering a wedge into the V for victory, a poignant symbol that not only referred to winning the war in Europe, but for African Americans winning the struggle for equality in the U.S. So I'm going to jump some slides, and I have a whole section here that it is really sort of a run through to World War I to now. So I'll just put them up for a second. And the Red Cross Arts and Skills was an amazing World War II program. This was another program that brought metal work to Walter Reed. The military also embraced arts and crafts and had a very vibrant program that started through the 50s and is actually still going today. Vietnam, Help Hospitalized Veterans, which is a nonprofit that has been passing out craft kits at VA hospitals for free since Vietnam. And then some of the art therapy, music therapy work of the current wars, and the masks that you see are from the art therapy work of Melissa Walker at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence at Walter Reed. And there is a brand new article in the February issue of National Geographic about these masks and Melissa's work. And then there's also non-clinical art projects that are happening in the hospitals, the military hospitals. So, right, so as we now live through the centenary years of World War I, veterans and artists alike are creating art projects that not only speak to the memories of the Great War, but also articulate our more current war experiences through expressions of devastation. Giuseppe Pellicano's gas mask, made at a Combat Paper Project workshop in Wisconsin in 2012, recalls the horrors of gas warfare that is so hauntingly featured in Claggett Wilson's 1919 painting, Symphony of Terror, where a row of combatants in gas masks are dimly depicted in the trenches by the blast burst. Trained as a ceramist and sculptor, British artist Paddy Hartley's creative career began intersecting with medical technology in 2004. His work with face corsets for plastic surgery led him to the pioneering facial surgery work for World War I soldiers, completed by Dr. Harold Gillies at Queen Mary's Hospital, Sidcup. Two major projects developed from Hartley's discovery: the ongoing Project Facade and a 2007 National Army Museum Chelsea exhibition, Faces of Battle, that was attended by many of the descendants of the men featured in the show. Project Facade is regarded as a landmark science-art collaborative combining and interpreting elements of surgical, social, and military history with a contemporary art-making process. The first phase of Project Facade brought the untold histories of 16 World War I servicemen treated for horrific facial injuries to international audiences. Using vintage uniforms as the canvas and embroidery as the means of conveying newly discovered stories about the pre- and post-operative lives of the men, Hartley used the fabric and stitches on the uniform to call to mind skin, tissue, and surgical stitchery. Research in the National Archives queue and information from the descendants' family enhanced the findings Hartley unearthed in the Gillies archives. The stories of the men's pre- and post-war lives were sometimes heartwarming and full of hope, and other times brutally tragic. Hartley is currently developing the second phase of Project Facade, creating new work to be showcased during the centenary years of World War I. Project Facade is archived by the British Library, and I chose this particular piece because it's the same person whose work I showed when I had the image of Dr. Gillies' workshop up. This is William Spreckley. In 2011, retired Marine Warrant Officer and former combat artist Michael D. Fay launched the Joe Bonham Project, based on the central character in Dalton Trumbo's 1938 anti-war novel, Johnny Got His Gun. The horrific mutilation suffered by Bonham as a World War I doughboy was the inspiration for Fay's group arts initiative. The Joe Bonham Project is witness or reportage art documenting today's battle-wounded service members. Unlike the fictional Bonham, who was hospitalized and forgotten, the purpose of Fay's project is to keep the dedication, sacrifices, and indomitable spirit of our current-day wounded warriors present and accounted for. Access to wounded service members at the Walter Reed Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, and the McGuire VA Hospital in Richmond allowed Fay and his team of artists, including Society of Illustrators artist Victor Charles Juhas, to not only document the battle wounds sustained by these combatants, but to demonstrate the ways in which these warriors are still in the fight. Fay sees the artist's role as visually recording the courage and sacrifice of these men and women and keeping their experiences both visible and viable. Accordingly, these are portraits of rehabilitation and resiliency. Fay notes that the aim of the project is to be neither pro-war nor anti-war. We are not here to politicize the service members we are portraying. We are here to humanize them and give them a presence beyond the walls of their hospital rooms and therapeutic clinics. Both men illustrated here exemplify the resilience of the human spirit. Sergeant Jason Ross lost both his legs to an IED. while Lance Corporal Kyle Carpenter suffered severe injuries to his face and right arm from the blast of an enemy hand grenade, including multiple shrapnel wounds and the loss of his right eye. In June 2014, in a ceremony at the White House, President Obama bestowed upon Carpenter the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military honor, for his actions in Marja Helmand Province, Afghanistan in 2010. Like veterans of the First World War, many of today's former service members have embraced art making and are using their chosen medium to convey diverse messages. Patrick Sargent's Reveille, produced on handmade paper, recalls early morning life during his years in the Air Force. Tiff Holmes' composite photograph, Prisoner of War, is an image of herself superimposed over an image of the man who physically attacked her when she was in the Army Reserves. Ceramist and Gulf War Marine veteran Aaron Toole has made and given away nearly 15,000 clay cups festooned with images of the military and war. Toole believes the cup is the proper size for discussions of war. I end this lecture with one of my favorite combat paper project art pieces, Dulce et Decorum Est with Angel, an image that depicts a helicopter from the Iraqi War and an Irish war memorial from the First World War. The title references a poem by World War I veteran and poet Wilfred Owen, who was killed in the war. We close with a reading of Owen's poem by British actor Christopher Eccleston.
Bent double, like old beggars on the sacks, not mean, coffin like hands we cursed through sludge, till on the haunted flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of disappointed shells that dropped behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or line. Dim, through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him, drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If, in some smothering dreams, you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud and vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children, ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie. Dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.
Thank you. So I'm hearing we have 5 minutes for questions. And somebody might be able to see. Okay.
How does the craft that you're exploring here, how does it relate to craft on both other lines in our culture?
for what's happening now?
Yeah.
It actually fits into sort of a social agenda. There's a term called craftivism, and this work is very much representative of that. So it's an activist perspective.
How did you decide where to put your attention in this year? Because it sounds as if there was no way you could see it all.
I didn't see it all. And Mary Lou, who is one of the advisors here, has heard me regularly, I don't know what I'm doing. and actually, the act of actually putting, PowerPoints really work for me because I can use the visual and the narrative together to construct and show how something works and has a continuum.
In my work, I've run across some regulations where disfigured soldiers were simply not allowed to go outside. How did that intersect with any of the grass work that you researched?
It didn't.
No programs that they came forward?
Not, I mean, I actually, I just don't know that. I don't know if there were programs that were in the hospital, like the hospital where Dr. Gillies was serving, if they also brought in people like Louisa Purcell to work with the men. That requires going to the UK and kind of digging into to the Gillies archives to see what might be there to answer.
There were some laws here in the Chicago area banned the disfigured veterans from coming out in public for a while. So I was just wondering if crass people sought out those people or tried to fight the regulations or something of that order. There's so much research to do.
There's so much research. No, it's an overwhelming topic, let me just say. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Tara that I'm wondering, you talked a lot about World War I in this lecture, and you kind of see the beginnings, or at least what we know to be the beginnings around World War I. How do you, how can you contrast what goes on today of a similar nature with World War I? I realize it's a vague question, but
Actually, that section that I buzzed through really fast is that bridge. This section sort of lays out the different, the different ways across the 100 years that the arts were used in different ways. So World War I, there was a lot of intersect between vocational training and occupational therapy, and it got very confusing. And so by World War II, some of that was shifting. Some of what was being done in World War I as occupational therapy was being done as recreational therapy in World War II. And then arts for recreation was something else entirely, which was on the military bases. And then art therapy moving to today. And so, is that what you're looking for?
yeah.
And
So many questions.
okay, one more question. Okay.
Is there any effort to do art programs in the field, or is it all just when soldiers are returning home?
Wow, that's a great question. And I wish some of my military folk. Moira, can you answer that?
If it's done, I wouldn't say it's done on any predictable basis.
So there's nothing.
Within selected units or individuals, you have a referral person attached to you, they might facilitate it, but I don't think there's anything that's trying to deal with it.
Please join me in thanking Tara again for her excellent talk. We do have to stop it here, unfortunately. Just a couple of quick announcements. The door to this building will close at 5:30, so we want to get you out of here before that happens. But we encourage you to take a walk to the back and quickly look at the collections that are on display from the Veterans History Project and prints and photographs, many of which were referenced in Tara's talk. We are on break for the next month with our programming, but we are back in March with our first in a three-part series called the Bloomberg Dialogues on Astrobiology. We'll be bringing scholars from around the world in the humanities to discuss the impact of the search for life in the universe on humanistic thinking. So please sign up on our list to learn more about that, and thank you again for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.